A while back, I made a video called AAA Gaming is Destroying Itself or something along those lines, and it was a monologue made in response to all the layoffs and big budget flops throughout the gaming industry earlier this year. And in that video, I made a couple predictions / observations, one of which being that AAA gaming was going to get a lot worse before it got better, and that a lot of people were going to lose their jobs because the AAA sector of this industry dramatically overexpanded during the early 2020s. Operating costs are completely unsustainable. Budgets of these giant games need to be brought down before anything can be fixed, and the only way to feasibly do that is by laying off a lot of people because it's not lockdown culture anymore. People aren't playing games more than normally anymore, and live service games are now completely out of style, so publishers can't expect unlimited money banks from everything they put out like they could a few years ago. All the extra money that went into expanding all of these big game studios during the early 2020s and the big pivot towards live service games to further increase profit margins, none of that was sustainable, and we are now seeing the repercussions of that. There's a lot of course correction that needs to happen for the AAA gaming industry to continue existing at all, and the people at the top of the AAA gaming industry are 100% at fault for all the overhiring during the early 2020s, because anyone with a brain should have been able to tell you that the gaming industry's explosion in the early 2020s was not the result of more people becoming hardcore gamers, but rather an obvious byproduct of everyone staying in their homes. Anyone with a brain also could have told you that the pivot towards live service games was a bad idea. The popularity of live service games were a flash in the pan because at one point they were a new concept, but they are now overdone and obnoxious. People don't want live service games. People don't want their games to continuously change. They want a game that is good now and can be played in its entirety now. But I bring all of this up because there's been a general understanding that as long as you make successful games, you'll be fine. You won't have to suffer the consequences of the AAA industry. The industry may be really screwy right now, and there may be a lot of layoffs and studio closures happening now and continuing to happen in the future, but as long as you basically just keep your head down and stay consistent, you'll be fine. But then, enter May 7th, and it's announced that Microsoft has closed a handful of its studios under the Bethesda umbrella. Roundhouse Games is being merged with ZeniMax Online to work on Elder Scrolls Online, that's probably the closest thing to a silver lining in this entire news report, because at least it doesn't look like anyone at Roundhouse is losing their jobs. But Alpha Dog Studios is being shuttered, Arcane Austin is being shuttered with some of the team members being absorbed by Bethesda, and Tango Gameworks is being closed completely. Tango Gameworks is gone. Now, closing Arcane Austin from the top-down business perspective makes sense, because they were responsible for Redfall, which was not only a gigantic financial failure, but it was also an embarrassment to Arcane, to Bethesda, and to Xbox at large. You can blame whoever you want for Redfall being what it was, and I'm not going to argue even for a second that Redfall was entirely Arcane Austin's fault. That game was absolutely the result of failed management. And you can point the finger all you want at whose management it actually was, but from a top-down perspective, if you're Microsoft looking for budget cuts, Arcane Austin was a pretty obvious choice, regardless of what other games they had worked on. But the real gut punch here was Tango, the team responsible for Evil Within, for Ghostwire Tokyo, and for Hi-Fi fucking Rush. And this obviously became a massive controversy when it was announced, because Microsoft, what are you doing? Tango had made easily the most hype Xbox game in the entire 2023 catalog. It made one of the most acclaimed games in Xbox's entire library, a game that Microsoft themselves called a massive success by every metric, and you shut down the studio responsible. And it's not like this was some one-off success for Tango, it's not like Hi-Fi Rush was a flash in the pan from an inconsistent studio. In fact, if you want to talk consistency, Tango was probably one of the most consistent studios under Xbox's umbrella. Since Tango's formation in 2010, they've released 5 games, 4 of which were successes. So if you want to talk stupid math with stupid numbers, because apparently numbers are the only way people want to talk about things in the industry these days, that's 4 successful games in 14 years, which is 1 successful game every 3.5 years. Can you name a single other studio under Microsoft's umbrella that has been that reliable? Oh, and did I mention that the last game they released was Hi-Fi fucking Rush? What really astonishes me about this, and I made a tweet about this, is the fact that Tango was one of the most consistent studios in Microsoft's lineup. I may have been vocal over the years for my distaste for some of their games, namely the first Evil Within, which I still think is the most overrated horror game of all time, but I understand my opinion isn't everybody's. I understand there's a lot of people who haven't played Resident Evil 4, I guess. But if you look at their output frequency and sales and reception, Tango is incredibly consistent, or I guess they were incredibly consistent. Thanks, Microsoft. Very cool. But Tango gets chopped just a year after providing one of the most acclaimed games of 2023, a game that Xbox themselves called a massive success, and a game that Microsoft was using as one of its flagship titles. Meanwhile, other studios under Microsoft's umbrella that are eating up way more money with way less revenue coming in are completely fine. My mind instantly goes to the Coalition, who are one of Microsoft's most heavily funded studios and who recently hired a whole bunch of new team members, and yet they haven't put out a solo developed game since 2019. And it's not like their 2019 game is still generating a ton of revenue in 2024. It's basically dead. We also have The Initiative, a studio that Microsoft founded in 2018 and still hasn't released a single product. And this isn't me saying that, oh, those studios should have been shut down instead or anything like that. I'm simply pointing out that there no longer seems to be any kind of consistent reward structure in the gaming industry, because apparently as long as you're sucking the right cock, you can just sit around and release nothing for years on end and be completely fine with all of your bills paid. Meanwhile, if you do your job and release good products, you can still get thrown out of the industry for committing the grave sin of not having a Call of Duty level IP under your belt, which is completely out of your hands and also isn't even an accurate measurement of success. Because if that was an accurate measurement of success, the Indian AA spheres wouldn't exist at all. Meanwhile, the Indian AA spheres are killing it right now. The AAA sector of this industry has become completely unreliable and entirely unsustainable. Making good games and being consistent with sales and critical reception is no longer enough to keep you from getting shit canned. It seems like the only way to keep a reliable paycheck in the AAA sector these days is to be attached to a major IP, which, like I just said, is entirely out of your hands most of the time. The AAA industry is going to die. It's only going to get worse from here. Like, the glass has been broken. There's no fixing this. If a studio like Tango can be shut down while the company that shuttered them is still holding on to other studios that are quite literally eating money and not producing any products, the AAA industry is fucked. There is no fixing this. This is fucked. And what really sucks is that the gaming industry as a whole is honestly in such a good place right now. Indie gaming is in a great place. AA gaming is in a great place. And yeah, I know there's lots of shit examples of bad players in every scenario and every corner of the industry, but the point I'm making is that it is a really good time to be a gamer. There are so many good games to play if you aren't completely obsessed with the AAA sector. But the problem is that the AAA sector is where most of the money is, and the AAA sector is what more or less dictates the direction of hardware and subscriptions and the model of the industry as a whole, and it always takes a few years for the AAA side of things to catch up with consumers because of how long game development actually takes these days at the AAA level. Which means we're in for at least another couple of years of this nonsense, and another few years of really talented studios getting shadow realmed because they signed the wrong contract with the wrong publisher. All the while, AAA gaming gets less polished and more predatory and more out of touch because the budgets are giant and the revenue isn't there anymore, because the lack of polish and abundance of predatory business models has pushed a massive portion of the buyers away from it. The AAA industry no longer answers to the consumer, And the only way for that to be corrected is for it to completely collapse, which is what we're watching in real time. And in some ways, it's a beautiful thing to see, because it leads to some things like what we've watched over the weekend with Sony and Helldivers 2 and the whole PSN fiasco that they had to roll back due to consumer backlash. The Helldivers PSN situation was an indication of the AAA industry course correcting. But the fact of the matter is that most of the problems with the AAA industry cannot be fixed that quickly, because the feedback loop of the AAA industry is not as instant as a barrage of negative Steam reviews. And most of the problems cannot be fixed that efficiently, because the negative feedback those problems have to experience cannot be provided until the product is released. And while the AAA industry just keeps trying to figure its shit out, it's going to keep burning money, and as long as it's burning money, really talented people are going to be caught in the crossfire, which is exactly what happened with Tango. I don't actually think the decision to close Tango came from Xbox's leadership or Bethesda's leadership. I'm almost positive it came from a higher up at Microsoft. I think someone punching numbers for Microsoft saw that they needed to cut the budget, and they just scrapped the studios under Bethesda's leadership that had the smallest profit margins, which unfortunately was Tango. Because even though Hi-Fi Rush was a big critical success with a buttload of players and a buttload of units moved, it also was not a live service that could generate an infinite amount of money for an infinite amount of time. And it's not like the number crunchers give a shit about public opinion. They're just looking at numbers, because from a gamer's perspective, yeah, the decision to close Tango makes no fucking sense. But from a businessman's perspective, I guess it does. And that's the fucking problem. If you can't make infinite money, you can eat shit with a spoon. Never mind the fact that infinite money games are dying rapidly. Never mind the fact that Tango's next game was surely going to be a smash hit because of their great work on Hi-Fi Rush. None of that matters. The art you're providing is not capable of making infinite money for an infinite amount of time, so you can get fucked. And it is such a fucking shame. I've been having the time of my life replaying old games. I've been having the time of my life playing indie and AA games. I just downloaded another Crab's Treasure. I'm going to lose myself in Shadow of the Erdtree once that comes out, because From Software seems to be the only AAA company capable of understanding what people want these days. That is until Bandai Namco swoops in and forces them to make a stupid live service and they get Babylon's Fall. It's just such a fucking shame. It is such a shame. Like, I knew it was going to get worse before it got better. I knew that was inevitable. But goddamn, of all the companies to get caught in the crossfire, you shuttered the people behind Hi-Fi Rush. This is pathetic. Like, you really couldn't cut the budget of The Coalition, or 343 Industries, or The Initiative, or whoever the fuck is making Forza and nothing else. You really couldn't cut those budgets a bit and make sure you kept the studio that is reliably making you good products? Get fucked, Microsoft. Seriously. I feel like I've been really forgiving of a lot of the things that Microsoft does on this channel, because in the grand scheme of things, there are other AAA companies doing worse things. But oh my god. Way to make me feel like a fucking asshole for giving you the benefit of the doubt every once in a while. Jesus Christ. This is so depressing. Toodles.